My vision for my studio is that it'll be a space of limitless creativity. In this video, I will share 2 stunning DIYs and a mini tour of my partially done studio. The first DIY is creating this sunset mosaic on a tabletop. The inspiration came from this photo that I found on Pinterest. I had an old table that I got from Bamboo Bazaar in 2016. It was just lying there collecting dust, and then while cleaning I found a bag of stained glass chips that I had got for a project from my friend Saras, who runs Grasshopper India, and I thought the stars had aligned to do something. I first primed the surface with an oil-based primer just so I have a white surface to play with, and then we had already segregated the glass chips, so we went about placing the pieces first before we actually glued them down. If you are just going to do blocks of colors with mosaic, then you can directly go ahead and start gluing the pieces. Here I'm making sure that the edges are lined up with pieces that are straight, and then the middle is getting filled. That's why you see we placed the edges first and then went about filling the inside. It was a fun project. This actually took about an hour, I think, for the two of us, and it was kind of fun. I also wanted to do a little bit of the sun shining through the water. This is how it looked, all placed. And now came the really difficult part of gluing it down. We actually had to lift each and every piece, put a little bit of fevicol, and then place it back. And it was a messy process because in so many pieces you tend to lose where you've glued down and where you haven't. You will see why I'm saying this. I think I need a process for how I need to go about gluing, but yeah, this was the most tedious process of all, gluing the pieces down. It took forever. I think this took about 5 or 6 hours. DIY is not about doing it cheap or doing it yourself because you have the time or you just want to try something. DIY is about learning new things, learning new experiences, and when you DIY, you actually appreciate handmade and people who make handmade more. Once everything was glued, we left it for 2 full days so that it can cure completely before we started the grout process. I'm using a chocolate brown grout from Roff. Initially I wanted to do a black grout, but then I realized that the contrast could be too extremes. So I settled for a chocolate brown, and I'm glad I settled for a chocolate brown because I think the end result turned out really beautiful. And if you see, a couple of pieces have not been glued down properly, and when I was grouting, they sort of 1 or 2 pieces lifted themselves up, and I had to smoosh them back down as best as I could. There you go. My mosaic expert friend Neha told me that the consistency of this grout was a little too thin. It had to be a little more thicker. And I think it was thin because when it completely dried, I realized that it had sunk to the bottom. The purpose of the grout is to make sure that it gets into those corners and levels the surface. The tile and the grout are level, but when this dried, even though when I was doing it, it looked level, when it completely dried, it almost sank a little and you could make out that the surface is uneven, and I had to do a second coat, of course. This table was approximately 3 feet by 1.5 feet, and start to finish, from when I started priming it to the time it was completely cleaned on top, I think it took about a month's time with all the other things that I had to do. You can see here that it's a little sunk in, and then of course once the grout is sufficiently dry, you'll just have to wipe the excess grout out. And yeah, this is, I think, the third tedious process of the whole mosaicing business. This was before I did the second coat, and you can already see that it's not level. I let it dry completely for 2 days and then did the second coat on it. The bottom shelf had I had gotten pine strips done on it, and I wanted to give it a color stain. So here I'm using the regular fevicol acrylic colors that you get in bottles. Added a little bit of color and a lot of water. If you're going to stain the wood, you want to start with the lightest first, and then you can go on and make it darker. Here you can see when I'm painting it onto the wood, it looks a lot darker, but it will dry a lot lighter. So start with a very light coat. If you want it darker, you can add more color, but you won't be able to take off the stain. So start light. I had about 4 strips going here, so I wanted them in 4 different colors to match the colorful top. And yeah, this was also a fun process. This is not the final finish. This table still needs to have a coat of polyurethane or varnish or something. And this is going to be my pantry table, where the microwave, the kettle and everything is going to be kept. And the whole thing turned out pretty good, I must say. I'm yet to style it, so stay tuned for the styled shot. Let me give you a quick tour of my studio before we move on to the next DIY. Like I said in the beginning of the video, my vision for my studio is that it's going to be a space of limitless creativity. Any crazy idea that I have that I want to try, I want to try. The studio is split into 2 units with an entrance in between. Here I've created a living room setup, and this is my enchanted forest wall. And on the other side, on the right of the entrance, is a window where I have a tiny little dining created. It still needs curtains. This wall needs a finish. The chairs need to be painted. So there's a lot of work that is still pending. But yeah, it's coming together really well. The square footage of the studio is somewhat similar to a small 2-bedroom home or a spacious studio apartment. And when it's completely set up, I want the space to look like a home. This part of the studio has a small desk for work and will mostly be used for styling and aesthetic purposes. This by far is my favorite space. I cannot tell you how much I loved creating this living room space, and it just makes me so happy every time I work from here. And now I have a space that I can decorate and redecorate, and which can change with seasons, and I don't have to live in a work site, and it's easier to take photographs for the magazine right here. Next we move to the fun DIY that happened here. It's been a month since the enchanted forest wall has been ready and it's already seeing its first DIY. I had so much fun shooting this. The enchanted forest needed some birds and bling. So I got this stencil from Amazon. I cannot tell you how beautiful this is. Just wait till it's finished. I think the size of this is about 30 by 40 inches and it has two lovely branches going up with birds and flowers and butterflies on them. The first thing I did was to measure the stencil to see how much I need to stencil so that it looks proportionate to the sofa that I had. I am a control freak, so being hands-on really helps and make sure that I have this feeling of being in control. I measured the same distance from the floor so that I can start stenciling bottom up. Katie Kinney has been very kind to come and help me fix the stencil on the wall and give me a ton of unsolicited advice. I used the 200-gram pack of antique gold in Asian Paints Royale. No mixing water and used a foam roller to roll it in. Whenever you're stenciling, always use a tray because it lets you take out the excess color on your roller. One, you won't get a lot of bleeds. Two, you will also get a very even finish. And I only opened the paint after the stencil was properly secure on the wall. Since this is a fairly large stencil, I had to hold down parts and then roll it. Otherwise, I would have got paint in between the edges and then it would bleed onto the sides. So, since only the sides are secure and this is a very, very large stencil, it's 30 inches by 40 inches, you want to hold down a little where you're stenciling and then roll your color in. The gold actually looks very coppery in the video, but it's actually very, very gold. And it's so therapeutic to watch somebody roll on a stencil. Moment of truth. There were 0 bleeds and I just had to leave it to dry and then position the stencil again on top and get to work again. I think the measuring part is what really takes a lot of the time. If you take time to do the prep in every single DIY, you can be sure that your end result is going to be fabulous. Don't rush the process of prep and don't rush to get to the good part. Once the second stencil was done, I created a border. I used a steel scale as reference for the border thickness and taped the inside and the outside. If the first DIY was taxing for the back, this one was for the legs because I was getting on and off the stool quite a bit. I used the same gold to roll the border in. I wasn't really aiming for the luxury orient kind of look, but it somehow, I think when it was finished, it looks very oriental. There were a few patches where I left out some motifs because they looked like they were hanging in the air, so I simply filled them with some branches, and then it was time to take off the tape and reveal the final design. That's a perfect crisp line. Mwah. Look at the details of the stencil. The masking tape has to be very carefully taken off because sometimes it can peel the putty with it. It did peel off somewhere at the bottom. You can see there's a little speck of white on the right side, but overall it peeled off pretty good and it looks like a piece of art on the wall. Start to finish, this wall took about 2 hours to complete. Of course, it wasn't the full wall that I had to stencil. This is probably about 5 feet by 6 feet. No, about 3.5 feet by 5 feet. Yes, but it just took about 2 hours and it looks absolutely stunning. Here is how it looks all styled up. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any other suggestions for me, please do reply in the comments. See you soon.